What would you do if you opened your sister's glove box and found something that shouldn't exist? Something that immediately told you that everything you thought you knew about your family was wrong. Romy Reiner faced that exact moment. It wasn't a casual discovery. It wasn't a simple misplacement or an old receipt tucked away between car manuals. No, what Romy found would instantly change the trajectory of her night, her life, and perhaps even the story of her entire family. In the glove box, among the mundane clutter of car maintenance and old paperwork, there sat a small, unassuming phone. But it wasn't the phone itself that demanded attention. It was the label taped to the back, handwritten in a shaky but deliberate script. Nick, delete after. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the first glance, the phone seemed ordinary, switched off, lifeless. Yet the moment Romy's eyes met the label, a chill ran through her. The words were simple, but their implications were terrifying. Why was her brother's name on this phone? Who had written the note? And most pressing of all, why was this phone hidden in her sister Tracy's car? The questions piled up faster than the answers could come. And the timing of the phone, the timestamp of the last missed call, was what truly shook her to the core. It allegedly aligned with the night of the murders, a night that would soon be etched into the headlines and every true crime feed around the country. Imagine the tension of that moment. One hand gripping the car door for support, the other trembling as it hovered over this device that shouldn't exist. Romy could feel her heartbeat hammering in her chest. Every second stretched into an eternity. She had to decide quickly: ignore it, hide it, or call for help. And help didn't come from the police first. She called security, alerting them that something dangerous had been uncovered, something that could not be left unattended. That decision would later be dissected, analyzed, and debated. Most people would immediately think to dial 911, to involve law enforcement, to demand answers. But Romy's choice to call security first was telling. It was a sign that in that moment, she didn't just fear the phone or its contents. She feared what it represented. She feared what, or who, it might bring into her immediate reality. To understand why this discovery was so alarming, it's necessary to step back and grasp the gravity of the events that had just unfolded. Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, were discovered stabbed to death in their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. The estate itself, a sprawling symbol of wealth and comfort, suddenly became the stage of unspeakable tragedy. Their son Nick, 32, who lived in the guest house on the property, was arrested that very night. He faced 2 counts of first-degree murder, thrust into a spotlight darker than anyone in that family could have imagined. And the story doesn't stop at the arrests or the headlines. It goes deeper, into the psyche of the family, into the choices Romy made in those first horrific moments, and into the secrets that every member may have carried. Romy Reiner, only 27 at the time, was the one who allegedly discovered the bodies. Her bravery, or perhaps her necessity, in coming forward to police paints a complex picture of loyalty, fear, and instinct. She reportedly warned authorities about a dangerous family member, hinting at the internal chaos long before police officially laid eyes on the evidence. This dangerous figure, one might already suspect, was her brother Nick. But the questions remain. How much did Romy know in advance? What led her to connect the dots? And what role did that glove box phone play in forcing her to act so decisively? The existence of the phone in Tracy's car, labeled specifically for deletion and connected to her brother, presents a paradox. On one hand, it is a mundane, tangible object, something almost banal in appearance. On the other, it serves as a window into the darkest corners of family dynamics, secrecy, and the kind of premeditation or caution that shakes even those closest to the perpetrator. Why leave a device like this anywhere it might be found? Was it an oversight, a miscalculation, or a deliberate breadcrumb intended to be discovered? And if it was meant to be found, what message was it sending? As viewers, as readers of this story, we have to grapple with the complexity of human behavior when placed under extreme pressure. There is something uniquely horrifying about the intersection of familial trust and betrayal. You think you know someone, the people who share your blood, your holidays, your childhood memories, and then a single object disrupts everything you assumed about their intentions. In Romy's case, that disruption came in the form of a small, unpowered phone. It was both a key and a warning. It represented knowledge, danger, and an immediate need for action. Let's consider the moment itself. Imagine standing over a glove box in a quiet parking lot, late at night, the world around you seemingly normal, and yet knowing that inside that small compartment lies a potential piece of evidence tied to a double homicide. Romy allegedly faced that scenario. The emotional weight of such a discovery is hard to overstate. Shock, panic, confusion, and above all, responsibility. The weight of choosing what to do next in a moment where every decision could have lasting consequences. She made a call to security. Why security first, instead of police? Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps a calculated move to control the scene before authorities arrived. But the discovery wasn't just about the phone. It was about timing, context, and alignment with events that had already shocked the nation. The missed calls, reportedly tied to the night of the murders, created an almost cinematic tension. Imagine the mind racing. Was this call the last communication my parents had? Was this device involved in plotting, warning, or concealing? And every unanswered question escalates fear, urgency, and the need for immediate action. At this point, you may be asking yourself, how does one phone in a glove box carry so much significance? It's because this story is more than a story about objects. It's a story about people, choices, and consequences. It's about how a single overlooked item can unravel narratives, alter legal outcomes, and force individuals into moral and practical decisions they may never have imagined. And while we focus on Romy's immediate reaction, the implications ripple outward, affecting how police interpret evidence, how the public perceives the family, and how the legal system might eventually handle a case already complicated by blood ties, pre-existing tension, and public scrutiny. Moreover, the glove box phone is emblematic of a larger, more disturbing question. How well do we ever truly know the people closest to us? Nick Reiner's alleged actions had already shocked the world, but the existence of this phone, and its precise labeling, suggests forethought, secrecy, and the possibility of other undiscovered elements within the family dynamic. It also forces us to question the role of those who discover such evidence. Romy didn't simply stumble across a phone. She uncovered a piece of a larger puzzle, one that police had yet to fully piece together. Her choice to call security, her reaction, her fear. All of these actions indicate an acute awareness of danger and responsibility, a moment where instinct and ethics collided in real time. And yet, even after all of this, we are left with more questions than answers. Who wrote the label? Why was the phone switched off? Did the timing of the last missed call implicate anyone else? Was the phone intended as a safeguard, a warning, or something more sinister? The implications of this single discovery are staggering. It is a tangible representation of chaos and mystery, embedded within an already tragic scenario. So we begin this story with a single, chilling image, a small, powered-off phone, resting in a glove box, bearing a note that reads, "Nick, delete after." From this object, an entire narrative unfolds, a story of murder, suspicion, fear, family loyalty, and moral reckoning. And while the phone itself is simple, the consequences of its discovery are anything but. By the end of this story, viewers will understand not only the events of that tragic night, but the layers of tension, secrecy, and human behavior that intersected in ways almost unimaginable. But before we reach the conclusion, we must first walk through the story piece by piece. We need to explore Romy's perspective, the timeline of events, the role of Nick, the implications of the burner phone, and the emotional gravity of discovering something so potentially incriminating hidden in plain sight. What would you do if you were Romy Reiner? How would you respond to a device that simultaneously could be a key to truth and a dangerous trigger? And most importantly, what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. This is where our story begins. Not in the headlines, not in the police reports, but in the quiet, tense moment of discovery. A moment that would ignite a chain reaction of fear, suspicion, and revelations that the Reiner family and the world were not prepared to confront. What would you do if a simple motion, opening a glove box, turned into a moment you would never forget? For Romy Reiner, that motion was not just a mundane task. It was a doorway into a world she had never imagined, a world where fear, suspicion, and family secrets collided in the most shocking way possible. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet of the night, the soft hum of a car engine, and the mundane act of reaching for the glove compartment. It was ordinary, normal, almost boring, until the phone appeared. The glove box itself was unremarkable. A small compartment of hard plastic, filled with the usual clutter of receipts, old insurance papers, and perhaps a pair of sunglasses. Nothing about it screamed danger. And yet, the contents it held that night were far from ordinary. Romy's fingers brushed against something cold and rectangular. At first, she thought it might be a case, a wallet, a misplaced item. But then she saw the small tape affixed to its back, handwritten in a sharp, deliberate script. Nick, delete after. Her immediate reaction was disbelief. How could her brother's name be here? Why was there a phone, hidden, in her sister Tracy's car? The implications were immediate and chilling. Was it a coincidence? Or was it deliberately placed there, a hidden object meant to be discovered, or kept from discovery at all costs? Her mind raced through scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a puzzle, a trap, and a warning all rolled into one. The phone itself was small and unassuming. It was powered off, completely silent, as though waiting for someone to react. There were no notifications, no buzzing or beeping to alert her. It was lifeless in a way that made it all the more menacing. For Romy, the absence of activity was deafening. She knew instinctively that the phone held significance far beyond what she could immediately perceive. Romy's hand trembled as she lifted it. Every instinct screamed at her to put it down, to leave it alone, to step back from something she couldn't understand. Yet curiosity, and perhaps a sense of responsibility, pushed her forward. In that moment, time seemed to stretch, each second carrying with it the weight of what this small device could mean. The handwritten note was stark, simple, and yet horrifying in its implications. Nick, delete after. 2 words, 5 letters each, that carried the weight of secrecy, urgency, and danger. The timing was what truly made Romy freeze. Reports later indicated that the last missed call timestamp aligned with the night of the murders. The night Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, were found stabbed to death at their Brentwood estate. The connection was undeniable, at least in Romy's mind. This was not a random phone, nor a coincidence. It was a silent witness, a trace of something that had already happened, or was about to. The realization struck her like a physical blow. Her pulse quickened, her stomach tightened, and a cold sweat broke out across her forehead. In that instant, Romy faced a choice. The phone was evidence, or at least a piece of evidence. It could implicate someone, protect someone, or simply exist as a warning. The most immediate question was simple but urgent. What to do next? Most people, in a moment of panic, would call the police immediately. But Romy did not. Instead, she made the choice to call security. Why security first? It's a question that would later perplex analysts and armchair detectives alike. But in that moment, it made sense. The immediate danger wasn't knowing the truth. It was the possibility that someone could discover her handling the phone, that the very act of touching it might escalate the situation. By calling security, she created a buffer, a controlled space between herself and the potentially dangerous unknown. This was not hesitation. This was calculated instinct under pressure. As she waited for security to arrive, Romy couldn't stop herself from examining the phone more closely. The tape was frayed at the edges, the handwriting deliberate but almost anxious. Whoever wrote it had intended for someone to see it, or perhaps had wanted to ensure it could be destroyed after its purpose was served. The ambiguity was terrifying. Was it a trap? A warning? Evidence planted to guide or mislead investigators? Each thought seemed more sinister than the last. The context made the discovery even more harrowing. Just hours earlier, the family had been thrown into unimaginable tragedy. Reiner and Michelle were dead. Their son, Nick, was arrested almost immediately. Romy, as the daughter and sister in this fraught situation, had already faced unimaginable shock and grief. Now, here she was, confronted with a tangible artifact from that same night, a physical representation of danger and secrecy. The phone wasn't just a device. It was a manifestation of the chaos surrounding her family, a reminder that nothing was as it seemed. Imagine the mental calculus happening in her mind. The phone had a name, a connection to her brother, and a timestamp linked to the night of a double homicide. It was evidence she might need, but it was also a risk. Each moment she held it, the implications multiplied. The fact that it had been hidden in her sister's car added another layer of confusion and fear. Why Tracy? Why not leave it somewhere else? Who had access to this vehicle, and for how long? Romy's mind raced through every permutation, every possibility, each one more horrifying than the last. And yet, she maintained a kind of stoic focus. She didn't scream. She didn't panic in a way that would attract attention. Instead, she acted, making the call to security and ensuring that the scene would remain undisturbed until help arrived. In that moment, she became the guardian of a secret that no one else was yet aware of, a silent witness to the implications of a device that could change everything. The suspense of discovery was compounded by the eerie stillness surrounding her. The parking lot, the car, the quiet night air, all served to heighten the tension. There was no distraction, no external noise to break the sense of foreboding. The phone sat in her hands like a ticking clock, silent yet ominous. Every second of waiting felt like an eternity, and all the while, the question lingered. Who else knew about this device? Who else had interacted with it? And for what purpose? The label on the phone was as critical as the device itself. Nick, delete after. A simple command, but one that suggested planning, foresight, and an awareness of consequences. It implied that whoever wrote it was concerned about detection, about leaving traces, about controlling the narrative in the aftermath of events too large and too terrifying to be ignored. For Romy, the label transformed the phone from a simple object into a symbol of potential betrayal, danger, and familial complication. By the time security arrived, Romy had composed herself enough to convey the urgency of the situation without revealing all of her fears. The phone was handed over, carefully preserved, its significance noted, but still shrouded in mystery. And yet, even as professionals took control of the scene, the emotional weight remained with her. She had seen something that no one else had yet witnessed, and that knowledge carried both responsibility and fear. The mini cliffhanger of the glove box moment lies in its simplicity. What seemed like an ordinary car compartment contained a device that linked directly to the most shocking events of the night. One small phone, one handwritten label, and one young woman's instinctive actions became a pivotal point in a narrative already steeped in tragedy, fear, and suspicion. Romy Reiner didn't just find a phone. She uncovered a piece of the puzzle that would shape the investigation, challenge public perception, and test the limits of familial loyalty. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Most people would have picked up the phone and dialed 911. It's instinctual, automatic. When danger or evidence of a crime appears, law enforcement is the first line of defense. Romy Reiner did not. Instead, she called security. That decision has puzzled experts, armchair investigators, and the public alike. But in the moment, it made terrifying sense. Picture the scene. Romy, already shaken from the discovery of her parents' bodies, now confronted with a small, powered-off phone in her sister Tracy's glove box. The handwritten label screamed, "Nick, delete after," a chilling command that instantly suggested urgency, premeditation, and secrecy. The timestamp on the last missed call matched the night of the murders. In other words, Romy wasn't just holding a phone. She was holding a potential linchpin of the entire investigation. And yet, the danger wasn't just abstract. It was personal. Calling 911 in that moment would have meant introducing law enforcement into a situation that was already volatile. There were questions Romy didn't have answers to. Had anyone else touched the phone? Was it being monitored? Could someone have been watching her while she discovered it? Every instinct screamed that she needed a buffer, a protective layer between herself and the unknown. Security provided that buffer. Security, unlike police, could respond immediately without turning the discovery into a full-scale public spectacle. They could secure the phone, observe the scene, and provide protection without the immediate chaos that often accompanies a 911 call. Romy, consciously or not, understood the practical implications. She needed containment first. She needed control. And in that instant, security was the tool that offered both. This choice also speaks to human psychology under extreme stress. In life or death moments, people often act first to ensure personal safety before thinking about procedure or protocol. Romy was facing precisely that, a situation that combined the emotional shock of discovering her parents' deaths with the tangible threat implied by the phone. Fear was real, and instinct guided her toward an action that minimized immediate exposure. The choice also highlights an important point about evidence. A phone is not just a device. It is a repository of data, a potential key to motive, timeline, and relationships. Handling it correctly in the immediate aftermath of discovery is crucial. By calling security, Romy ensured that the device would be protected until trained personnel could examine it. Mishandling could have risked contamination, accidental deletion, or, worse, alerting the wrong person to its existence. Security offered a controlled environment for preservation without immediate public exposure. There's also the human element of family dynamics to consider. Romy was not acting as a detached observer. She was a daughter, a sister, and a witness to tragedy. Her actions were informed by fear not just for herself, but for her sister Tracy, for other family members, and for the fragile chain of events that had already spiraled out of control. Calling security first allowed her to safeguard those closest to her while still taking responsible action. This decision raises questions about perception versus procedure. To outsiders, dialing 911 seems obvious. To Romy, the stakes were immediate and personal, not procedural. The phone was evidence, yes, but it was also a potential trigger. Who knew about it? Who might be monitoring her? In situations of extreme duress, perception often outweighs protocol. Romy's choice reflects a nuanced understanding of her environment, the physical space, the potential threats, and the emotional weight of the moment. Security's arrival brought another layer of complexity. They had to quickly assess the situation, understand the significance of the discovery, and provide protection, all while respecting Romy's immediate emotional state. This was not a simple intervention. The personnel needed to act decisively yet delicately, ensuring that Romy's instincts to protect herself and the phone were supported rather than undermined. It's a delicate balance. Too much intervention could escalate stress. Too little could endanger both the evidence and Romy herself. During this time, Romy's mind was racing. The label, the timing, the ownership of the phone, all of it demanded careful consideration. The phrase, "Nick, delete after" was not just a note. It was a directive, a warning, a breadcrumb in a complex story that was still unfolding. Romy had to navigate these layers of implication while remaining physically and emotionally safe. The decision to call security was her way of buying time to think, observe, and survive. Moreover, calling security first reflects the subtle distinction between immediate threat management and legal procedure. Police intervention is about law enforcement and investigation. Security intervention is about containment, observation, and immediate response to potential danger. Romy intuitively understood that she needed containment first. By securing the scene and the device, she created a controlled environment where subsequent actions, police involvement, evidence preservation, and legal reporting could occur with reduced risk. There's also a profound psychological element to consider: the need for control in moments of chaos. Romy had just faced a situation that would overwhelm most people, discovering a burned-out line of trust in her family, witnessing the aftermath of violent death, and holding in her hands an object that could illuminate or complicate the narrative. By choosing security, she exercised agency. She exerted influence over the scene, ensuring that, despite the chaos, she retained a measure of control over what happened next. Human behavior in crisis often prioritizes protection over correctness. Romy's actions exemplify this principle. By calling security, she was protecting herself, her sister, the evidence, and potentially even her family's narrative. In a high-stakes scenario like this, protection is a rational response, even if it diverges from standard procedure. This moment also highlights the emotional intensity of Romy's position. She was navigating fear, grief, suspicion, and moral responsibility simultaneously. Every decision carried weight. How to handle the phone, whom to call first, how to ensure personal safety, and how to protect her family from further harm or exposure. Security provided the immediate solution, but the emotional burden remained entirely on her. The choice between security and police also reflects trust dynamics. Romy had to consider not only the immediate physical risk, but also the broader implications of who had access to information. Calling 911 might have exposed the discovery publicly, creating panic or drawing attention from unwanted sources. Security, by contrast, allowed for a more measured, private response, minimizing exposure while maximizing protection. The act of involving security first also underscores a critical theme. In moments of extreme uncertainty, intuition can outperform protocol. Romy's instincts guided her to take a step that, on the surface, may seem unconventional, but in context, was a rational, calculated, and ultimately protective measure. It was a decision grounded in survival, observation, and responsibility. Yet, even with security present, the tension did not dissipate. The phone remained in Romy's mind, a silent, inert witness to events too large to fully comprehend. Its presence demanded answers, and the implications of its discovery rippled outward, affecting how authorities approached the investigation, how the family processed the tragedy, and how Romy herself would navigate the subsequent days. The mini cliffhanger of this chapter lies in the tension between instinct and procedure. Romy's choice to call security first preserved safety and evidence, but it also created questions. What would happen next? How would authorities interpret this action? And, most importantly, what did the phone ultimately reveal, or conceal, about the events of that night? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. 2 words, 5 letters each, written hastily but deliberately. Nick, delete. That was all it took to transform a small, unassuming phone into a psychological landmine. For Romy Reiner, seeing her brother's name emblazoned on a device already tethered to a tragedy she had barely begun to process was more than shocking. It was terrifying. In that single moment, the phone ceased being just an object and became a symbol of secrecy, betrayal, and questions that had no immediate answers. What made the label so unnerving wasn't just the fact that it bore Nick's name. It was the command attached to it, delete after. There's something intrinsically alarming about instructions that hint at concealment, that carry a sense of urgency and forethought. Whoever wrote the note didn't just want the phone gone. They wanted the data erased, evidence removed, a story untold. And the handwriting, though simple, conveyed intent, a deliberate decision to communicate a command that would, at the time of discovery, leave Romy weighing her options and her safety. The psychological impact of this label cannot be overstated. Imagine holding a phone that allegedly connects to the night of your parents' murders, only to see your brother's name on it paired with a directive to destroy it. The mind begins to race. What had Nick been doing with this device? Was he aware that it might be found? Was the phone a tool, a weapon, or a trap? And most importantly, could Romy trust what she had in her hands? Experts in crisis behavior and family dynamics often emphasize that in situations like this, a single object can carry the weight of an entire narrative. The label was not just a name, it was a signal. In that instant, Romy had to reconcile what she knew about her brother, what she had already witnessed, and what this device now implied. The cognitive load was immense. One hand holding the phone, one mind racing through possibilities, and all the while, the memory of her parents' deaths hung over her like a storm cloud. The use of a handwritten note is itself a curious detail. In an age dominated by digital communication, handwriting conveys intimacy, intent, and sometimes secrecy. Someone wanted to ensure that whoever found this phone would see a clear instruction, yet they chose a method that was personal, almost intimate. It's as though the writer understood the psychological impact of the act. This is not just a phone. This is a message, a warning, a command. And then there's the timing. The last missed call on the phone allegedly aligns with the night of the murders, a fact that immediately escalates the stakes. This wasn't a random device, nor an old, forgotten item. It was active at a critical moment, directly linked to events that would define the narrative of the Reiner family forever. For Romy, the convergence of her brother's name, the directive, and the timing created a nexus of fear and urgency she could not ignore. Consider the implications from a criminal investigation standpoint. A phone labeled with a family member's name and a deletion directive suggests premeditation, awareness of consequences, and the potential for concealment of evidence. It raises critical questions. Did Nick know the phone might be found? Was it used to communicate with someone involved in the crime? Or was it entirely unrelated, a device meant for a separate purpose but coincidentally aligned with the tragic timeline? The uncertainty itself is part of what made the discovery so devastating. Romy's reaction was a mix of fear, confusion, and instinctual calculation. She had to process the discovery immediately, secure the device, protect herself, and assess the potential ramifications. Calling security first, as discussed in the previous chapter, was a measure to maintain control. But internally, Romy was grappling with far more than procedure. She was confronting the possibility that her brother, the person whose name was written on the phone, might be implicated in something unthinkable. And in the quiet of that parking lot, holding a device that could change everything, she had to weigh every action carefully. The label also carries emotional weight because it transforms Nick from a family member into a potential actor in a criminal scenario. Until that point, he was her brother, a sibling bound by shared history, loyalty, and memory. But the phone and the command to delete its contents introduces ambiguity and suspicion. How could Romy reconcile the brother she knew with the one implied by this device? This tension between familial love and emerging suspicion is central to the story. It's what makes Romy's actions both understandable and remarkable. For viewers or readers trying to make sense of the scene, it's important to note the interplay between simplicity and menace. The note's brevity, just 2 words plus a command, belies the profound implications. A single device, a single label, can redefine events, shift suspicion, and demand immediate decision-making. The unassuming nature of the phone itself is deceptive. In many ways, its small size mirrors the subtlety with which family secrets can fester. Hidden, overlooked, but capable of enormous consequences when finally revealed. The label also introduces a fascinating tension between evidence and narrative. In the legal and investigative sense, a phone like this could provide timestamps, call logs, messages, and potential proof of intent or involvement. But the handwritten note complicates matters. It suggests that someone anticipated discovery and sought to manipulate what evidence might be visible. For Romy, this transforms her role from witness to inadvertent guardian of a critical piece of the puzzle. Her next actions could determine whether the phone becomes an artifact of truth, a tool for deception, or something else entirely. There's also a human curiosity element. The very presence of a name and a command forces questions that cannot be ignored. Who wrote the note? Why that particular phrasing? And why hide it in her sister's car, rather than somewhere more obvious or more private? Every element of the phone's discovery, from placement to labeling, raises more questions than answers. Romy had to process these ambiguities in real time, under the weight of grief, fear, and moral responsibility. Emotionally, the label strikes at the core of trust. Romy is forced to confront the uncomfortable possibility that someone she loves, her own brother, may be connected to something deeply troubling. The note doesn't scream guilt, it whispers it. It doesn't demand confession. It demands action. And the ambiguity is terrifying. There's no certainty, only implication and potential. For anyone in her position, the psychological toll would be immense. The discovery of the label also intersects with what we know about human behavior under stress. When faced with ambiguous threats, people often overestimate danger, anticipate worst-case scenarios, and act defensively. Romy's careful approach, calling security, preserving the phone, maintaining control, reflects a sophisticated blend of instinct, intelligence, and situational awareness. She is acting not only to protect herself, but to maintain the integrity of potential evidence and to navigate an emotional labyrinth of grief, fear, and suspicion. The phone, paired with its label, is more than a physical object. It is a narrative device, a pivot point around which the story of that night turns. Its discovery forces action, introduces tension, and reframes relationships within the family. Romy's response, her fear, her prudence, her courage, is central to understanding the unfolding events. It's one thing to hear about a murder and a subsequent arrest. It's another to hold in your hands an object that may bridge the gap between suspicion and proof, between private grief and public tragedy. This mini cliffhanger, and the tension it generates, lies in the ambiguity of intent. The label suggests deliberate action, but its purpose remains unknown. Was it a warning to Romy? Was it a tool of manipulation? Or was it a piece of evidence left by someone anticipating discovery by investigators? The possibilities are endless, and each one is chilling in its own way. As the audience, we are left with a central question. What does a simple label reveal about intent, premeditation, and trust? How does seeing a loved one's name on a device tied to tragedy reshape your understanding of them? And most importantly, what does Romy do next, holding in her hands a tangible intersection of fear, family, and potential evidence? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The night of the murders was quiet, or at least, it appeared that way from the outside. The Brentwood estate, a sprawling property valued at $13.5 million, sat in serene luxury, its manicured lawns and quiet streets suggesting safety, stability, and normalcy. But beneath that calm exterior, tragedy had already struck. Inside the grand home, Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, faced a violent end, stabbed to death in what police would later classify as a premeditated act. For those observing from afar, the narrative seemed simple, a horrific crime, a shocking arrest. But the reality, especially for Romy Reiner and those closest to the family, was far more complex, fraught with emotion, confusion, and unanswered questions. Romy's involvement in the night's events began long before she opened the glove box in Tracy's car. In the hours leading up to the discovery, the estate had already transformed into a labyrinth of fear, uncertainty, and foreboding tension. The Reiners, a family that had enjoyed wealth and relative public admiration, were now thrust into circumstances that no one could have predicted. The quiet of the evening, the sense of routine, and the comfort of home were all shattered in an instant. The timeline of the night is critical. Allegedly, the murders occurred during a window of time when Nick, the son living in the guest house, had access to the main residence. The specifics of that timeline would later become the focal point of the investigation. When he was seen, when he was alone, and what interactions took place leading up to the tragedy. For Romy and other family members, reconstructing these hours would become an exercise in both terror and necessity, as every detail might hold a key to understanding what happened and why. Imagine the estate at that hour. The lights, the shadows, the subtle sounds of the night. A property designed for comfort and privacy now became a stage for horror. Every room, every hallway, every door might carry evidence or bear witness to acts that had already occurred. And for Romy, walking into that space shortly after the murders meant navigating a psychological landscape filled with grief, shock, and the instinctual drive to find answers. When the bodies were discovered, allegedly by Romy herself, the emotional impact cannot be overstated. To come face to face with the aftermath of violence, especially involving one's own parents, is an experience that defies comprehension. There is grief, of course, but there is also disbelief, a frantic search for logic in an event that is inherently illogical. Romy's reactions in those first moments would shape her subsequent decisions, including the discovery of the glove box phone, the call to security, and her interactions with authorities. The house itself, in the wake of the murders, became both a crime scene and a crucible of emotion. Investigators would later note the positioning of the bodies, the location of weapons, and the surrounding environment as critical to understanding the sequence of events. But for Romy, the estate was less about forensic detail and more about the human cost. Every step she took was a negotiation with fear, grief, and the responsibility of being the first witness to an unimaginable scene. The night's events also highlighted the proximity of danger within the family structure. Nick, living in the guest house, was allegedly close enough to access the main residence, yet the distance provided both opportunity and ambiguity. The dynamics of proximity, observation, and timing all play into the psychological complexity of the night. For Romy, understanding who was where and when became an urgent mental exercise as she sought to reconcile the known facts with the terrifying unknowns. In these early moments, the narrative was incomplete. Romy's observations, combined with her instincts and her discovery of the glove box phone, began to form a picture that was both alarming and confusing. The phone's presence, time-stamped to the same night as the murders, suggested premeditation, evidence of planning, or at the very least, a link to critical events. Romy's immediate priority, therefore, was preservation. Securing the device, contacting security, and ensuring that nothing she did could compromise the integrity of what might be vital evidence. The estate, normally a symbol of stability and wealth, now reflected chaos and vulnerability. Security systems, alarms, and the physical layout of the property became secondary to the human drama unfolding within its walls. Every locked door, every quiet hallway, every piece of furniture suddenly seemed to hold significance. For Romy, navigating this space required a delicate balance, moving carefully to avoid disturbing potential evidence, while also processing the emotional weight of witnessing the aftermath of violence. The psychological impact of discovering the bodies cannot be overstated. Grief mingled with shock, and disbelief competed with an urgent need to act. Romy's immediate response was guided by instinct: ensure safety, secure evidence, and reach out for support. Her decisions in these first hours, particularly the call to security and later interactions with law enforcement, were shaped by both rational calculation and intense emotional pressure. The timing of events that night also played a critical role. Missed calls on the glove box phone, aligned with the estimated time of the murders, added another layer of urgency. Each call represented a potential piece of the puzzle: communication, warning, or complicity. Romy, aware of these details even in the early stages of discovery, understood that the phone was more than a device. It was a link to critical evidence, possibly connecting actions, intentions, and individuals in ways that were not yet visible. In many ways, the night exemplified the intersection of human vulnerability and calculated action. Romy's decisions, her observations, her caution, her choice to involve security first, highlight the complexity of navigating a crisis. She was simultaneously a grieving daughter, a cautious observer, and an inadvertent participant in a scenario that would captivate national attention. Each action she took was informed by a combination of instinct, emotional intelligence, and situational awareness. The aftermath of the night also raises questions about family dynamics and trust. How could something so catastrophic unfold within a household? What signs, if any, had been present beforehand? And most importantly, how would Romy and other family members navigate the delicate line between loyalty and suspicion, grief and investigation, protection and exposure? These questions would linger long after the initial shock had passed, shaping both the personal and public narratives surrounding the case. The narrative tension of the night lies in its simultaneous clarity and ambiguity. Events occurred, bodies were discovered, and arrests were made. But the precise motives, intentions, and psychological states remained murky. Romy's perspective, therefore, becomes a critical lens for understanding the unfolding drama. Her experiences encapsulate the terror, the urgency, and the moral dilemmas that arise when ordinary people are confronted with extraordinary tragedy. Every detail of that night, the timing, the location, the proximity of the guest house, the discovery of the bodies, the subsequent finding of the glove box phone, feeds into a larger story of suspense, fear, and moral complexity. For viewers or readers, the night represents both a chronological anchor and a psychological map, guiding the understanding of why actions were taken, why decisions mattered, and how a single family's tragedy could ripple outward into a public spectacle. And yet, even as the night unfolded, not all answers were available. The alignment of the phone's last missed calls with the timing of the murders suggests critical connections, but the full story remained obscured. Romy's subsequent actions, her careful handling of the phone, her decision to involve security, and her observations of the estate, would become central to understanding the sequence of events. Her narrative bridges the gap between public reporting and private reality, illustrating the human dimension of tragedy in ways that formal investigation alone cannot capture. The mini cliffhanger of this chapter lies in the intersection of timing and evidence. The night itself was over, the murders had occurred, and the initial response had begun, But the implications of that night, especially as revealed through the glove box phone, had only just started to surface. Questions remained. What did the phone really contain? Who had written the note? And how would Romy's discovery shape the unfolding investigation and the perception of her family in the public eye? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. In the tragic story of the Reiner family, one name stands out as both witness and participant: Romy Reiner. At just 27 years old, she found herself thrust into a nightmare scenario that most people could never imagine. She didn't just stumble upon a mysterious phone in a glove box. She was allegedly the one who discovered the bodies of her parents, Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, in their Brentwood estate. That moment would change her life forever, defining her role in the family, the investigation, and the narrative that would soon grip the nation. Imagine walking into a home you've known your entire life, expecting familiarity and comfort, and instead finding horror. The house, once a sanctuary, transforms in a single instant into a scene of chaos and violence. For Romy, this was not an abstract news story or a dramatized case on television. It was her parents, her family, her world. The emotional shock of such a discovery is impossible to overstate. Grief, fear, disbelief, and a sudden surge of responsibility all collided in one overwhelming moment. Her role as the discoverer of the bodies placed her in an unimaginable position. She was both victim and witness, grieving child and key observer. The weight of that duality shaped her actions in the immediate aftermath, contacting authorities, handling evidence with extreme care, and navigating the complex dynamics of a family suddenly thrust into public scrutiny. Romy's instincts became a lifeline, not just for herself, but for the unfolding investigation. To understand the gravity of her discovery, it's important to recognize the psychological impact of being the first on the scene. Romy was confronted with not only the physical reality of death, but also the ethical and emotional responsibility of what to do next. Every decision carried weight. How should she move? What should she touch? How could she preserve evidence without jeopardizing the investigation? And perhaps most pressing, how could she navigate the immediate shock while maintaining composure for the authorities who would arrive shortly? Her presence at the scene also positioned her uniquely in the investigative narrative. Romy was not a detached observer. She was intimately connected to the family, the home, and the events of that night. Her testimony, her observations, and her subsequent actions would carry credibility, but also emotional weight. Investigators would need to reconcile her grief with her statements, parsing fact from emotion in a way that could ultimately shape the case against Nick, her brother. The discovery also illuminated the terrifying immediacy of danger. Romy was acutely aware of potential risks. She knew that the presence of a dangerous family member, a phrase she allegedly used when speaking with police, meant that caution was essential. Her quick thinking in contacting security, instead of immediately dialing 911, reflects her instinctive awareness of both personal safety and the need to protect potential evidence. She became a stabilizing force in a scenario that was chaotic, emotional, and fraught with legal implications. Moreover, Romy's actions underscore the interplay between familial loyalty and civic duty. She had to reconcile the horrifying possibility that a family member could be involved in the murders with her instinct to protect her parents' memory and preserve the integrity of the investigation. This moral tension adds a layer of complexity to her role. She wasn't just a grieving daughter. She was a crucial participant in the early stages of the case, navigating ethical, legal, and emotional boundaries simultaneously. Her discovery of the glove box phone in Tracy's car further complicated her position. It was one thing to find her parents deceased. It was another to uncover an object that potentially linked her brother to the timeline of the murders. Romy's instincts in handling the phone, ensuring its security, observing its labeling, and noting the timing of missed calls, demonstrate an extraordinary presence of mind under extreme stress. She became both witness and guardian of a piece of evidence that could illuminate the truth. The emotional stakes of being the first to find the bodies cannot be overstated. Romy was confronted with grief on multiple fronts: the sudden loss of her parents, the potential betrayal of her brother, and the moral responsibility of deciding how to act in a scene of unimaginable horror. These intersecting pressures created a psychological crucible, forcing her to respond with a combination of rationality and instinct that few could replicate under similar circumstances. It's also important to understand the societal and media context surrounding Romy's discovery. In cases involving high-profile families, the first witness often becomes a focal point of public attention. Romy's role as the initial discoverer placed her in the center of a media storm, with every action, word, and reaction potentially scrutinized. This added layer of stress amplified the emotional impact, making her decisions even more critical and challenging. The notion of being the first on the scene also carries long-term consequences. Romy's experience of that night would shape her understanding of family, trust, and personal agency. Her actions in those early moments, preserving the glove box phone, contacting security, and observing the estate, would become part of the public record, influencing both legal proceedings and public perception. She was, in essence, the bridge between the private tragedy of her family and the public narrative that would follow. Her courage and composure in that scenario are remarkable. Despite being young, grieving, and confronted with unimaginable trauma, Romy managed to take actions that preserved evidence, safeguarded herself, and provided authorities with critical information. This combination of instinct, intelligence, and emotional resilience is a defining feature of her role in the story. Additionally, Romy's awareness of a dangerous family member highlights the internal complexities of the Reiner household. The fact that she allegedly identified Nick as someone who should be a suspect speaks to a nuanced understanding of her family dynamics, one informed by lived experience rather than external speculation. Her observations became a critical part of law enforcement's early assessments, demonstrating how personal insight can intersect with investigative necessity. The discovery also underscores the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary events. Romy's world had been relatively normal, framed by family routines, expectations, and shared history. That night shattered that framework entirely. The transition from normalcy to chaos was instantaneous, and her response illustrates the human capacity to adapt, survive, and act decisively even under extreme emotional duress. One of the most compelling aspects of Romy's role is the way it embodies both vulnerability and strength. She was emotionally exposed, having confronted the deaths of her parents and the potential culpability of her brother. Yet she displayed remarkable agency, making decisions, preserving evidence, and ensuring the proper authorities were informed. Her experience highlights the delicate balance between personal grief and public responsibility in situations of extreme crisis. The mini cliffhanger for this chapter lies in the complexity of Romy's position. She is at once a grieving daughter, a key witness, and a guardian of evidence. Her discovery of her parents' bodies, and later, the glove box phone, sets the stage for the unfolding investigation, but it also raises urgent questions. What does she know that others do not? How will her actions influence the trajectory of the case? And what secrets remain hidden, waiting to be revealed in the days to come? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The phone in Tracy Reiner's glove box was small, unpowered, unassuming, and yet, it carried the weight of an entire investigation. A single object, its significance stretched far beyond its physical form. For Romy, discovering it meant facing the possibility that this device could either illuminate the truth behind her parents' murders or entangle her in a web of secrets she was not yet prepared to understand. But what exactly made this phone so consequential? Was it evidence, a clue pointing to Nick, or could it have been a trap designed to mislead, manipulate, or intimidate? To comprehend the magnitude of the discovery, it's important to examine what a burner phone represents. In the world of criminal investigations, burner phones are typically used to avoid traceability. They are disposable, unregistered, and often switched off when not in use. In this case, the device was powered down, making it silent, inert, yet loaded with potential information. Every missed call, every timestamp, every possible piece of stored data became a critical link in the chain of events surrounding the murders. The handwritten label, Nick, delete after, added a layer of psychological complexity. Was this an instruction to destroy evidence? Was it a warning meant to conceal a connection? Or was it a red herring, planted to misdirect anyone who might discover the device? Romy had to consider all possibilities in an instant. This small phone had become a nexus of fear, speculation, and critical decision-making. One wrong move could compromise the integrity of the investigation or place her in danger. From a legal standpoint, the phone was potentially a goldmine of evidence. Phones are repositories of intimate details, messages, calls, photos, location data. Investigators could reconstruct timelines, map relationships, and identify communications that may have led to the crime. The burner phone's very nature, however, suggested that someone wanted this information concealed. The question is, who? And why hide it in her sister's car, of all places? The placement of the phone is itself perplexing. A glove box is a private, everyday space, usually associated with mundane items like car manuals or insurance cards. Hiding a critical piece of evidence there raises questions about intent. Was it meant to be found? Or was it carelessly left in a place where discovery was likely? The ambiguity of its placement created tension for Romy, as she had to navigate the decision of whether to preserve the device, examine it, or leave it untouched. Psychologically, finding a device labeled with a sibling's name and a deletion directive is disorienting. It forces a confrontation with the unsettling possibility that someone close to you might be involved in something terrible. Romy faced this internal struggle in real time, balancing grief, suspicion, and the instinct to act. The stakes could not have been higher. She was holding an object that might incriminate her brother, exonerate him, or leave more questions than answers. Consider the potential that the burner phone held. Missed calls, timestamps, stored numbers. Each could be pivotal in reconstructing the events of that fateful night. If it contained evidence connecting Nick to the murders, the implications were enormous. Conversely, if it had been planted as a trap, discovering it could put Romy or other family members at risk. Handling such a device requires extraordinary care, emotional control, and situational awareness, all of which Romy displayed in calling security first rather than acting impulsively. The concept of a trap adds a chilling dimension. A device placed deliberately to mislead could contain fabricated evidence, false contacts, or even location data designed to implicate the wrong person. For Romy, who had just found her parents stabbed to death, the possibility of a trap would have compounded the fear. She had to assume that the phone's discovery was meaningful, but she could not yet know whether it was truthful, misleading, or dangerously manipulative. Every minute Romy held that phone, waited, and considered her next move, the implications multiplied. The device was more than a piece of plastic and metal. It was a symbol of the tension between truth and deception, evidence and manipulation, family loyalty and moral duty. It forced her to confront questions about her brother. Did he know the phone might be found? Was he involved? Or was he, like her, caught in a web he could not escape? The burner phone's significance also extends to its broader implications in the criminal investigation. Law enforcement would recognize its potential immediately. A device like this could provide call logs, texts, or even metadata critical to establishing timelines. Every element, the handwriting, the placement, the timestamps, could become evidence of premeditation or concealment. Romy, in preserving it for security personnel, ensured that it remained intact, safeguarding the integrity of a potential case against Nick or whoever might be implicated. Emotionally, the phone became a focal point for fear, grief, and moral responsibility. Romy had to navigate the horrifying reality of her parents' deaths while also confronting a device that tied her brother to events that may have led to that tragedy. The interplay between familial love and suspicion is one of the most difficult human experiences, and the burner phone crystallized that tension. It was a physical representation of uncertainty, moral conflict, and the urgent need for cautious action. Another layer of complexity arises when considering the potential for misinterpretation. A burner phone in a glove box labeled Nick, delete after, is inherently ambiguous. Does the note imply culpability, awareness, or innocence? Does it suggest premeditation, coercion, or misdirection? Romy had to act under the assumption that any interaction with the device could have consequences, both for herself and for the ongoing investigation. The phone also underscores the tension between ordinary objects and extraordinary circumstances. To anyone else, a phone in a glove box might seem trivial, but context transforms mundane items into critical pivots of narrative and action. For Romy, the device was simultaneously mundane and catastrophic, a tool that could either clarify or further complicate a night already defined by violence, confusion, and grief. In examining whether the phone was evidence or a trap, one must also consider human behavior in high-stakes scenarios. Individuals involved in criminal acts often anticipate detection, attempt to manipulate discovery, and leave misleading trails. The handwriting, placement, and labeling suggest forethought, potentially indicating an awareness of law enforcement scrutiny or familial observation. Romy, intuitively sensing the gravity of the discovery, preserved the device while mitigating immediate risk. Her instincts were validated. The phone's significance would become central to both public understanding and legal proceedings. From a storytelling perspective, the burner phone exemplifies suspense. Its discovery immediately creates questions. What information does it hold? Who wrote the label? Was it a deliberate attempt to implicate Nick or someone else? How will Romy's decision to preserve it influence the investigation? The answers are not immediately available, creating tension, anticipation, and a psychological hook that draws the audience deeper into the narrative. The mini cliffhanger in this chapter revolves around the uncertainty of intent. Romy has discovered a device that could illuminate the truth or complicate it, evidence or trap, reality or deception. Every action, every decision, and every piece of interpretation hinges on the answers to these questions.